theme for my entire life. After being really horribly angry for a long time, frustrated and snapped at everything, didn't have coffee. It's like, oh my gosh, I might be able to actually work out and go to the gym again because, and that's what I've been able to do, and I hadn't been able to do that in a really long time. So it's really good.
Now this brush that you're using, is this a Japanese brush? Or?
This is German brush, German. Travel brush. It's meant for you to be able to take this out, fold it up, put it back in the case, screw it on, so then, and it's got a hole in there so your brush will dry, but then you won't ruin this really nice tip. The best travel brush I've ever found in my entire life.
Is it sable or is it?
It's sable. Okay. I didn't realize that when I bought it though. Not that I have anything, I mean, there's probably a terrible way that sable give you part of their fur. I'm hoping not. I'm hoping they're just from shedding.
I thought sable was like just like a general shape of the brush.
Because that would be bad. But I use a lot of different types of brushes. These are just the brushes that I have with me now.
Right.
Any other questions from the audience? I don't feel like I'm being really informative. I'm kind of confused right now, and I don't know how to explain what I do.
There, please. I do scan for myself, but I send the originals in because I don't know how. I really don't do anything on the computer, so I know that there's something about calibration and different types of color, like RGB versus CMYK, and I don't know what people are using. And the minute a pop-up box comes up on the Mac and it asks me if I want to change something or this isn't configured for this, I freak out. And I just like, okay, because I don't want to change any. I don't like. I must be screwing up some settings for something at this point. I don't know what I'm doing, and I don't want to screw it up. So I'll save it for myself, and it'll look fine. And I do adjust levels a little bit. I know nothing about Photoshop except these 3 certain things, and so I save it at several different resolutions just in case. And then send the originals off so people can save it the way it's supposed to be saved. One day I'll learn that stuff if a really, really patient human being wants to teach me, because I'm real dim when it comes to that kind of stuff. I have to write down, forever, just to get me to scan something. I learned on someone else's Photoshop version, and it was really like an really old version of Photoshop. So every time I had to scan something, I would stop and say, Tony! What? He's my studio mate. He's like, I gotta scan something. I go, how do I do it again? And he'd just tell me in his head, go up to this bar, pull this down, go down 3, then move over 1. Okay, now save that. Now flatten the image. Now do that. Or whatever it was that he had to do. And I go, okay. And he goes, why don't you remember this? I go, I don't know. It just doesn't stick in my head. I go, let me write it down. He goes, you're gonna write it down on a piece of paper. He goes, doesn't that seem weird that you're writing down something for the computer on a piece of paper? I was like, it does, but that's the only way I'm going to remember it. So it took me writing it down before I actually would remember how to do it. And then when I got my own computer, it was a much more advanced version of Photoshop. So when I went to look for the boxes where I knew they weren't there. And they said something different, and it's like I had to learn it all over again. And it scared me. I mean, I would like to learn how to do stuff on the computer well enough, not because I want to eliminate this part of it at all, but because I want to be able to, what if I wanted to just paint something this size, and then take this and put it in as a panel on a page, which technically is making 10 times more work for myself, because instead of doing 1 giant page of comics, I'd be doing 5 separate pages of comics to then make 1 page of comics. Then that would probably be really, time ineffective for everybody. But isn't it a little bit easier for you to work at a certain size, though?
Oh yes, certainly with watercolor. And you mentioned Beast of Burden. The cast of characters is so large, and there's so many dogs, and there's size difference between people. Well, right now I'm working on Hellboy Beast of Burden crossover, and we have all the characters are in that, plus Hellboy, plus bad guys, plus rats, and they all gotta say something too. So you have to remember that there has to be space for lettering. And for watercolor, as you can see, ideally watercolor is supposed to be big, sweeping washes, not painting around like paint by number. And sometimes it turns into that, and that's really tedious. That's what takes lots and lots of time.
Now, what size are those pages that you're going to be working on?
11 by 17.
11 by 17. So
But
are you using
down
small
handles.
brushes for those, or?
I do. I use a smaller brush for, well, I'll start with a brush this big if I'm going to lay in washes and block in color for characters, but sometimes things are, you know, when I have to do the outlining or the dogs are really small, you know, you have to switch to, well, I won't pull these brushes out for everyday use because they cost way too much for me to have them deteriorate so quickly.
Does anybody else have a question? Gentleman at the back.
With comic books being such a contrasty medium with strong blacks, how do you preserve your light? Do you use cash sometimes, or do you like the?
Sorry, can you speak up a little bit?
Yeah.
How do you preserve
the light as much as possible? I mean, do you use cash for some small details like the gun that you put over?
I'm only understanding part of your question. How do I preserve light, did you say?
Yeah.
Usually I use the white of the paper. You paint around it. That's what I was taught. Like, a lot of times I see people, they're painting a value over everything, but I use the white of the paper as the whitest white I've got. And then the other question was, what about the dark?
Like, there's a product that you can use to.
Oh, masking fluid.
Yeah, masking fluid.
It's a big scam, that masking fluid. I've never found, like, they say that you can put it on there and they'll be able to peel it away. Well, I peel it away and there's paint underneath it, or it gets stuck to the fiber of the paper. One thing you're never supposed to do is, like, you know, because watercolor dries, you know, at its own sweet time sometimes, because this area right here has a lot more water in it than this area that I put in. You know, people use a hairdryer to make things go quicker, and that will immediately adhere the gum fiber to your paper, so now it's stuck in there. There are times when I've used this blue tape, if I've wanted to mask an area off, I'll draw very darkly underneath it, tape over here and start cutting it, or draw on the tape and cut the tape, because if you cut on the board, then you've got your razor line in there and your pigment will fall into that line, and then you've lost the effect that you're trying to get. So technically, because I'm super impatient, which is the other reason watercolor is probably the medium for me, it's like I don't have the time to waste to do that painting. You know, I usually just paint around it. I know there might be other things I can do. Sometimes I've gone back, like if I needed to pull out like a little star or something, I've gone back with white. But I try not to use a painted white at all. I also try not to use black out of the tube. I do more now, like I'll use a charcoal, but in my school we were taught that we were not allowed to use white or black. When we first got into watercolor class, or even in my fundamentals class, you know, you painted, because, let's see, every color mixed together becomes black. And so we weren't allowed to use black as a crutch, you know, because people came in with a certain idea of, you know, they buy black paint, they buy all these colors, and we teach you how to mix colors, and all about color theory. So, for the longest time, I thought black was cheating, and I wouldn't use black. But now I do, because I'm illustrating more than I'm painting. And, you know, like I'm trying to think of the instances I use black. There are different types of black, but I use them much more transparently.
So it's not an opaque black?
It's not an opaque black at all.
So you don't use white on the dogs of the eyes? You wouldn't use white?
No, I usually paint around that,
Yeah.
yeah. I should, I mean, sometimes, you know, I'll make a mistake,
Isn't that
and I
more
have to go
time
back in.
consuming?